The night Marcus Holt told his wife that her brother deserved a seat at the table, he meant it as a metaphor. He had no idea that within 48 hours, that metaphor would become the most expensive misunderstanding of Dominic Reyes's life. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and drop a like on this video. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? Because this story is going to test everything you believe about loyalty, entitlement, and what it really means to own something. Let's get into it. Marcus Holt was the kind of man who occupied space quietly. Not because he lacked confidence. Anyone who had watched him run a dinner service would understand that the man had a spine made of something harder than steel. But because Marcus had learned, through years of hard experience, that loudness was often the first refuge of people who had nothing substantial to say. He was 41 years old, lean in the way that people who work on their feet for 16 hours a day become lean, with careful brown eyes that had a tendency to observe longer than most people were comfortable with. He had a small scar beneath his left jaw from a kitchen accident at 23, back when he was a line cook earning $14 an hour in someone else's restaurant, dreaming of something that was entirely his own. 12 years later, that dream had a name. Holt & Company sat on the corner of Meridian Avenue and 5th Street in downtown Caldwell, a 38-seat restaurant that had earned 2 regional dining awards in its first 4 years of operation, and a quiet, dedicated following that packed every table on weekend nights from the moment the doors opened. It was not a sprawling empire. Marcus had never wanted a sprawling empire. What he had built was precise and considered, in the same way that a well-designed room is precise and considered. Every element there because it earned its place. He had poured years of savings, 3 years of planning, and the entirety of his first marriage into the process of building it, and the restaurant was the one of those investments that had actually survived. His second marriage to Renata was 4 years old, and had seemed, until recently, to be thriving with significantly more success than the first. Renata was vivid where Marcus was reserved, expansive where he was contained. She filled every room she entered with a kind of warm energy that Marcus had mistaken, in the early years of their relationship, for abundance. He understood now, with the particular clarity that comes from watching someone you love disappoint you repeatedly, that what he had mistaken for abundance was something closer to appetite. Renata wanted more of everything, always, and she had a gift for framing that wanting as generosity. Her brother, Dominic Reyes, had arrived in Caldwell 8 months ago with a duffel bag, a story about a business that had gone sideways in Phoenix, and an aura of aggrieved entitlement that Marcus found quietly exhausting from the moment they shook hands. Dominic was 38, handsome in a way he was clearly aware of, with the easy confidence of a man who had spent most of his life being bailed out before consequences could fully land. The Phoenix business, Marcus learned through careful inquiry rather than direct disclosure, had been a bar that Dominic had operated into bankruptcy in under 2 years, not because of bad luck or market forces, but because Dominic had an extraordinary talent for spending money that wasn't technically his yet, and assuming that the gap between present reality and future revenue was someone else's problem to close. Marcus had said nothing judgmental when Renata told him. He had simply listened and noted, and filed it away in the part of his mind where he kept information that hadn't yet become relevant, but almost certainly would. "He just needs a chance to get back on his feet," Renata had said, and Marcus had nodded and offered Dominic the use of the guest room for a month. That month had become 4, then 8, and in that time, Dominic had cycled through 3 jobs that didn't suit him, borrowed $4,000 from Renata that Marcus was reasonably certain would never see a return journey, and developed what he appeared to consider an informed set of opinions about the restaurant business. "Thorough. The problem with your menu," Dominic told Marcus at dinner one Wednesday evening, helping himself to a second portion of the chicken Marcus had been testing for a new preparation, "is that you're thinking too small. You've got a great location. You could easily double your covers, add a late-night bar program." The build-out for a bar program would run approximately $400,000, Marcus said, with the same tone he might use to note the temperature outside. "And our current model is profitable because we are not thinking bigger than the space supports." Dominic had smiled the way people smile when they believe the person correcting them doesn't fully understand their own situation. Sure, I'm just saying. Potential, you know. You've got the bones." Marcus had returned to his food and said nothing further. He had noticed over the preceding weeks that Dominic had begun referring to the restaurant in possessive terms, not dramatically, not in ways that were easy to directly confront, but in the accumulated language of proximity. "Our kind of place," Dominic would say to friends he brought around. "Marcus runs a tight ship over there." The "over there" was particularly telling, as though the restaurant existed somewhere separate from Marcus's specific daily 12 years in the making effort, a resource that floated free of individual ownership and might reasonably redistribute itself toward whoever was most interested. And Renata, Marcus had begun to understand with a growing and unwelcome clarity, was not discouraging this perception. It was a Tuesday evening when he first heard it. He had come home early, a rare thing, the result of a supplier cancellation that had pushed prep to the following morning. And he had paused in the hallway when he heard Renata's voice carrying from the kitchen with the particular confidence of someone who did not believe they were being overheard. "Marcus would never just say no to a family proposal," she was saying, "especially if it came through me. I know how to handle him." And then Dominic's voice, lower, more careful. "You're sure about the equity conversation? Because if he's going to resist—" "He won't," Renata said. "I'll bring it up at the right moment. Timing is everything with Marcus. You have to get him when he's relaxed, when he feels like things are going well. He gets generous when he's happy." Marcus stood in the hallway for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car passed. He was aware of a sensation he could only describe as the settling of something. Not shock, not betrayal exactly, but the particular feeling of a suspicion becoming a confirmed fact. And with that confirmation, a shift from uncertainty into clarity. He knew now what was coming. He knew now what he needed to do. He walked quietly back to the front door, opened it, and closed it again more loudly. "Hey," he called out, setting his keys on the entry table with deliberate casualness. "Supplier canceled. Thought I'd come home early." Renata appeared in the kitchen doorway, her expression perfectly composed. "That's nice," she said. "Are you hungry? Dominic was just heading out." Dominic appeared behind her, already reaching for his jacket. "Hey, Marcus, long day?" "Not too bad," Marcus said, meeting his brother-in-law's eyes with an affable calm that apparently registered as nothing remarkable. "Not too bad at all." He went to bed that night already thinking 3 moves ahead. Because Marcus Holt had not built a profitable restaurant in one of the more competitive dining markets in the state by being reactive. He had built it by being patient, thorough, and by understanding, with a precision that was almost architectural, exactly what his assets were, exactly what his vulnerabilities were, and exactly how to arrange the distance between them. He called his attorney the next morning. Not from the house, from his office at the restaurant, door closed, coffee untouched, with the focused stillness of a man who had already done his grieving and was now simply working. His attorney, a careful woman named Patricia Cho, who had drafted the original operating agreements for Holt and Company, listened without interruption as Marcus described what he had overheard and what he suspected was coming. There was a brief silence on the other end. "You're right to be thinking about this now," Patricia said. "Before rather than after. Tell me, what does the current ownership structure look like, and has Renata's name appeared anywhere in the business filings?" "She is not and has never been a partner, signatory, or named interest in the business," Marcus said. "The restaurant predates the marriage. I confirmed the prenuptial agreement covers business assets. But I want to make sure that whatever they're planning can't find purchase anywhere in the existing structure." "It can't," Patricia said. "Not legally. But that doesn't mean someone won't try. Walk me through what you think they're building toward." Marcus walked her through it. The months of groundwork, the language Dominic used, Renata's confidence about her ability to handle him. Patricia was quiet for a moment at the end. "They may be planning to present you with something that looks like a family business proposal," she said finally. "A request for Dominic to come on in some capacity, manager, partner, investor, and they're counting on social pressure, your relationship with Renata, and the framing of family loyalty to make you feel that refusing is the unreasonable position." "That is exactly what they're planning," Marcus said. "Then here's what I would recommend," Patricia said. and Marcus listened and took notes in his small, precise handwriting, and felt the clarity around him sharpen another degree. He said nothing over the following week. He went to work, ran his service, tasted his food, managed his team with the same steady attention he always brought to those hours. He came home and was present with Renata in the ways she seemed to expect him to be. Dinner conversation, the occasional movie, the ordinary texture of shared life. If she noticed anything different in him, she gave no indication. If anything, she appeared to be growing more relaxed, more confident, like someone who believes the hardest part of a plan is already behind them. That Friday evening, Renata asked him if Dominic could come for dinner on Sunday. "Of course," Marcus said. "I'll cook." There was a brief flicker in her eyes, gratitude or possibly the particular satisfaction of a plan moving on schedule, before she smiled. He'd love that. Sunday arrived soft and overcast, the kind of autumn afternoon that blurs the edges between inside and outside, warm and cool, comfortable and unsettled. Marcus prepared the meal with his characteristic focus. A braised short rib that he had been perfecting for 3 months, served with a celery root puree and a red wine reduction that required the kind of patience most people had long since engineered out of their cooking. It was, by any objective measure, an exceptional meal. Dominic said so 3 times, in the effusive way of a man building toward something. They were at the stage of the evening that Renata had apparently identified as the optimal window, the wine open, the meal completed, the atmosphere softened, when she set down her glass with the careful deliberateness of someone making a move on a board. "So," she said, and the word had the weight of a door opening. "Dominic and I have been talking, and we wanted to share something with you. An idea." Marcus set down his own glass. He folded his hands on the table in front of him and gave them his complete attention. His expression was open, patient, entirely without alarm. He had been waiting for exactly this for 10 days, and he was very good at waiting. Renata presented it as a family opportunity, a chance to bring Dominic in as a managing partner at Holt & Co. Not a full equity partner initially, she was careful to specify, just a working share, perhaps 15%, which could grow over time as Dominic proved himself. She described Dominic's hospitality experience, the bar in Phoenix, which she characterized as a victim of external circumstances, his passion for the industry, his ideas for growth, the benefit of having family invested in the restaurant's success. She spoke for approximately 4 minutes without a significant pause, which told Marcus she had rehearsed this, and that she had rehearsed it with the expectation that he would interrupt her with resistance at some point before the end. He didn't interrupt. He let her finish. When she finished, there was a silence. Dominic was watching Marcus with an expression calibrated between casual interest and suppressed eagerness. 15%, Marcus said finally. His voice was entirely level. "To start," Renata said, with the gentle emphasis of someone managing expectations they expect to be managed upward. "And what would Dominic's role involve, practically speaking?" Marcus asked. Dominic leaned forward slightly. "Day-to-day operations, front-of-house management. I'm a people person, which you'd be the first to admit you're not, Marcus, no offense. Business development, maybe some involvement in events and private dining." He paused. "Basically taking some of the load off you so you can focus on what you love. The food." The implication, delivered with a generous smile, was that Marcus's limitations as a people person had been quietly holding the restaurant back, and that Dominic's arrival would resolve this deficiency. Marcus absorbed this without visible reaction. "I appreciate you both thinking about the restaurant," Marcus said, and then, after a brief pause that was perfectly measured, "I have to be honest with you." Both of them shifted almost imperceptibly, the adjustment of people who had expected a longer runway before arriving at resistance. "I think this conversation is happening," Marcus continued, "because both of you believe that the restaurant is something that can be offered, that it exists within the negotiable space of this marriage, available to be proposed upon." He looked at Renata. "I heard you on Tuesday evening, when you thought I wasn't home. I heard you tell Dominic that you know how to handle me, that you'd find the right moment, that I get generous when I'm happy." The color left Renata's face in a way that happened too fast to be managed. Dominic went very still. "Fry, I want to be clear," Marcus said, and his voice had not changed in volume or temperature, "about what Holt & Company is and what it is not. It is not a marital asset. It is not a family resource. It is not a vehicle for rehabilitating a business career that ended in bankruptcy because of decisions I had no part in. It is a restaurant that I built over more than a decade with my own capital, my own labor, and my own vision. And it is not available." Renata found her voice. "Marcus, I'm not finished," he said, not unkindly, simply with finality. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He had dressed for dinner with a characteristic formality that neither of them had found unusual, and placed a single envelope on the table between them. "That is a letter from my attorney, Patricia Cho, which I asked her to prepare this week. It is a formal confirmation of the ownership structure of Holt & Co. SU, the prenuptial agreement provisions covering business assets, and a summary of the legal position any claim against the business would encounter." He looked at Dominic directly, for the first time since the conversation had begun. "I'm not sharing this because I believe you have a legal path here. I'm sharing it so that we are all working from the same set of facts, and so that this conversation does not have to happen twice." Dominic looked at the envelope, as if it had appeared on the table by some hostile magic. He did not reach for it. "I wasn't trying to take anything from you, Marcus." "No," Marcus said. "You were trying to be given something, and there is a version of this story where you've told yourself that distinction matters." He paused. "I don't think it does, particularly." The evening ended with a quiet devastation that felt nothing like the angry confrontation Renata had apparently prepared for. Marcus could tell, from the way she kept catching moments to interrupt, that she had anticipated raised voices, accusations, the kind of emotional heat that could be argued against or turned. The calm was something she had no tools for. Dominic left 20 minutes later, taking the envelope. He did not make eye contact when he said goodbye. Renata waited until the door closed behind him. Then she turned to Marcus, and the expression on her face had shifted from social composure into something raw and less calculated, genuine anger, or something very close to it. "You humiliated him," she said. "I declined a proposal," Marcus said, beginning to clear the table. "With information rather than emotion. You had an attorney draw up documents before you'd even heard us out." "I heard you out on Tuesday evening," Marcus said, "when you didn't know I was listening." That silenced her for a moment. "So this whole dinner was a meal I cooked for my wife and her brother," Marcus said, "and then a conversation I'd been prepared to have for 10 days. He set the plates in the sink and turned to face her. "Renata, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer it as honestly as you can manage right now. Do you understand that what you and Dominic planned was a manipulation? That the entire strategy was designed to use my feelings for you to extract something from me that you both knew you had no right to ask for through transparent means?" She was quiet for a long time. In that quiet, Marcus could hear the shape of the answer she was searching for, something that would allow her to be wronged rather than wrong, maneuvered around rather than simply plainly exposed. "I was trying to help my family," she said finally. "I know," Marcus said, and the two words carried a weight that had nothing to do with cruelty and everything to do with the specific sadness of seeing someone clearly. He did not sleep well that night, not because of doubt. The doubt had been resolved systematically over the preceding week, but because clarity about the right thing to do and ease of doing it are different properties, and Marcus had never been the kind of man who confused them. What he had not anticipated was Monday morning. He was at the restaurant by 6:30, as he always was, beginning prep with the particular quiet concentration of the early kitchen hours that he had loved since his first job. His sous chef, a young woman named Yolanda, arrived at 7. His front-of-house manager, Derek, arrived at 8:30. The regular morning rhythm established itself in the careful choreography of a well-run operation. At 9:47, Derek appeared in the kitchen doorway with an expression Marcus recognized as the one he used when something required immediate attention but did not yet have a clear category. "Marcus, Dominic Reyes is at the front door." Marcus set down his knife. "Is he?" "He has 2 other people with him. One of them has a phone out, looks like he's filming. Dominic is telling the staff through the door that he has an ownership interest in the restaurant and that he wants to conduct a walkthrough." Derek's expression remained professionally neutral, but his eyes carried the alert attention of someone watching a situation that had not yet declared its full intention. He's also mentioned your wife's name, more than once. Marcus dried his hands on his towel with 2 deliberate strokes. He looked at Derek for a moment with complete calm. "Lock the doors," he said. Then he picked up his phone and called Patricia Cho. She answered on the second ring. Marcus explained the situation in 4 sentences. Patricia asked 2 questions. Then she said, "Don't open those doors. I'll have someone there within the hour. In the meantime, do you have security cameras covering the entrance?" "We have 4 cameras covering that entire block of the exterior," Marcus said. "Good. Let him perform. Evidence of a fraudulent ownership claim, documented on your own surveillance system, is something we very much want to have." A brief pause. "Marcus, how are you doing?" "I'm doing my prep," he said. The hour that followed was, from a purely operational standpoint, one of the more remarkable things Marcus had witnessed in the restaurant business. Dominic Reyes stood outside the locked front door of Holt & Company for 43 minutes, his companion filming on a phone, while Dominic explained to the camera, and to the growing collection of curious passers-by that any street-level spectacle accumulates, that he was a co-owner of the establishment being denied access to his own business. He spoke with considerable conviction. He used phrases like "my investment" and "my stake" and "family partnership" with the fluency of a man who had been rehearsing them, possibly for weeks. He implied, without quite stating directly, that Marcus was engaged in some kind of financial irregularity that the presence of a co-owner would interrupt. He used Renata's name 4 times as a legitimating reference. Inside the restaurant, the kitchen continued its prep. Yolanda executed a sauce reduction with the focus of someone who had decided, professionally, that whatever was happening at the front door was not her department. A prep cook named Elias, 19 years old and 3 months into the job, stood at a pass window for slightly too long until Yolanda redirected him back to his station with a single look. Marcus remained in his office, on his second call with Patricia, working through the documentation she would need. At 10:51, a woman in a gray coat arrived at the restaurant's front door, spoke briefly with Dominic, and then held up what appeared to be a business card. The filming companion took a step back. Dominic's posture, which had carried the particular erectness of performance throughout the preceding 43 minutes, underwent a visible adjustment, the specific deflation of a man whose audience has suddenly changed in nature from sympathetic observers to legal witnesses. Patricia's associate, a junior attorney named Coleman, who would later tell Patricia that he had rarely seen a fraudulent claim quite so enthusiastically self-documented, explained in clear, measured terms that Dominic Reyes held no ownership interest of any kind in Holt & Co.'s, that the documentation supporting this position had been prepared prior to Dominic's arrival that morning, that the restaurant's surveillance system had captured the entire preceding 43 minutes in high definition, and the continuing to represent himself as a co-owner to members of the public could constitute fraud. Dominic left. Marcus unlocked the front door at 11:15. He stood in the restored quiet of the dining room for a moment, looking at the tables set for lunch service. The white linens, the small votive holders Renata had actually helped him choose 2 years ago. The light falling across the floor in the particular way it did on overcast mornings, softened and even. He had built this, every part of it. The 12 years behind him and whatever years were ahead of him, he had built this. He went back to his kitchen. Renata called at noon. He let it go to voicemail. She called again at 1:30. He let that go too. He was in service, and he did not take personal calls during service. It was a rule he had maintained for 11 years, and he saw no reason to suspend it, because the personal had decided to become inconvenient. She was home when he arrived that evening. She was sitting at the kitchen table with the still, controlled quality of someone who had been sitting there for some time, preparing what they were going to say. Her eyes were red at the edges. Marcus noticed this. He set his bag down and sat across from her. "He told me what happened," she said. "Did he? You had an attorney waiting for him. You locked the doors." "I locked the doors," Marcus confirmed, "because a man I had never authorized to represent himself as a co-owner of my restaurant was standing outside my restaurant, representing himself as a co-owner of my restaurant. He thought she started. I know what he thought, Marcus said. He thought that because you had promised him something, the thing you had promised him was yours to promise. He looked at her steadily. And that is the part of this conversation I need you to sit with, Renata. Not what Dominic thought, what you told him that led him to think it. The silence that followed had a different quality than the silences of recent days. It was the silence of someone confronting a thing they have been carefully not confronting and finding that it does not become smaller for having been avoided. I told him you would come around, she said quietly, that if I presented it right, you would want to help family. And did you believe that? Marcus asked. Or did you believe that the combination of your confidence and his presence and the social weight of the dinner table would make it difficult for me to say no? She didn't answer, which was its own answer. I need to tell you something, Marcus said, and for the first time that day, something shifted slightly in the controlled precision of his delivery. Not much, just enough to mark the difference between professional clarity and genuine grief. When I heard you on Tuesday, what hurt me most was not the plan. It was the phrase, I know how to handle him. Because that is not language that belongs in a marriage. You don't handle me, Renata. I'm not a situation to be managed. I'm a person you made a commitment to. Renata's composure, which had held itself together through the preceding exchange with considerable effort, cracked then, not into anger, but into something that looked uncomfortably like remorse. Real remorse, not the social performance of it. I know, she said. Her voice was very small. I'm not asking you to choose between me and your brother, Marcus continued. I would not ask that, because it is not a fair request, and it is not one that would lead anywhere good. But I am asking you to understand that what you did, the planning, the positioning, the decision to use your knowledge of me as a mechanism, that is a violation I'm going to need real evidence of understanding from you before I can set it aside. Not an apology. Evidence. Do you know what I mean by that? She nodded slowly. Something that takes longer than tonight, she said. Yes, Marcus said. Something that takes longer than tonight. In the weeks that followed, the situation with Dominic resolved with the efficient lack of drama that tends to follow the removal of leverage. He left the guest room within 10 days, relocating to a friend's apartment on the eastern side of the city. The $4,000 borrowed from Renata remained a settled loss, written off with the quiet resignation of someone learning to price the cost of repeated faith in the wrong direction. Dominic made no further contact with Marcus, and Marcus required none. The footage from Holt and Company's security cameras was preserved. Patricia Cho confirmed calmly and without theatrics that no legal claim of any substance could be assembled from what Dominic had attempted, and that if he were to try, the documentation of his Monday morning performance would constitute a fairly remarkable exhibit. He did not try. Renata attended 3 sessions with a therapist over the following 2 months, not at Marcus's insistence, but at her own. She came back from the second session quieter than she'd gone in, and from the third session with the particular settled quality of someone who has heard a difficult truth stated plainly enough that it can no longer be comfortably rerouted. She told Marcus one evening in November that the therapist had helped her understand something about the difference between helping someone and enabling them, and about the particular seduction of believing you could solve a person's problems by simply redistributing resources that didn't belong to you. I used you, she said, not elaborating, not hedging, just naming it. Yes, Marcus said. I'm sorry. He looked at her for a moment with the careful attention he gave to things that mattered. I know you are, he said. That's why I'm still sitting here. They were not immediately or perfectly restored. Marriages do not work that way, and Marcus was not the kind of man who would pretend otherwise. But they were in the room together, working from the same facts, which was more than they had been 2 months earlier. And Marcus had learned to value progress measured in real increments rather than theatrical ones. At the restaurant, the winter season unfolded with the reliable momentum of a well-run operation that doesn't require drama to sustain itself. The braised short rib went on the menu in December and sold out within the first week of service every night it appeared. A regional food publication ran a piece in January that described Holt and Company as what happens when a chef decides that patience is a culinary philosophy rather than just a technique. which made Yolanda tape the printout to the kitchen wall and made Marcus read it twice before he put it down. He sat in his office one late February evening, the restaurant closed, the kitchen clean, the sound of the street outside muffled by the interior quiet he had always loved about these hours. He was reviewing inventory, a mundane task he had always found oddly satisfying, the pure practicality of it, knowing exactly what he had and what he needed. When he paused and sat back in his chair and allowed himself, for a moment, something that was not precisely reflection, but was close to it. He thought about the night he had stood in the hallway and heard Renata's voice carrying from the kitchen. He thought about the 10 days of quiet preparation that had followed. He thought about the envelope on the dinner table and Dominic at the locked front door and Patricia's associate with her business card and her measured sentences. He thought about Renata at the kitchen table with red edges around her eyes, saying, "I know," in a voice that was very small. He thought about what it had cost him and what had been preserved by the paying of that cost. The restaurant was his, not because a legal document said so, though it did, plainly and without ambiguity, but because he had made it his through those years of choices that accumulated into something real and durable. No one had given it to him. No fortunate circumstance had delivered it. He had built it from a line cook's wages and a belief that patience and precision, applied consistently over time, were a kind of power that loudness and appetite could never match or outlast. And it was still standing. He closed the inventory spreadsheet, put on his coat and turned off the lights one by one as he moved through the space, the kitchen first, then the bar, then the dining room, standing for just a moment in the dark before the last switch, listening to the quiet the way you listen to something you know the value of. Then he locked the door behind him and went home. Here is what Marcus Holt understood that Dominic Reyes never fully grasped and that Renata was still learning. The things you build with patience do not simply belong to you in a legal sense. They become part of the architecture of who you are. And when someone reaches for them without earning them, they are not just taking property. They are taking the years that the property represents, the early mornings, the failed tests, the slow accumulations, the decisions held to under pressure. You cannot transfer that through a dinner table conversation. You cannot inherit it through proximity to someone who possesses it, and you cannot extract it from someone who understands exactly what it cost. There is a version of this story where Marcus loses his temper and gives them exactly the confrontation they were prepared for. There is a version where he says yes, out of love and social pressure and the path of least resistance, and spends the next 3 years watching his restaurant slowly reshaped by someone who never understood what shaped it. There is even a version where he never stands quietly in that hallway and simply doesn't know what's coming until it's already arrived. But Marcus Holt was the kind of man who paid attention, who kept his own counsel, who understood that the most important decisions are rarely the ones you make loudly, who knew that locking a door at the right moment is not aggression. It is simply the correct response to someone attempting to walk through a door they were never given a key to. The restaurant is still open, still 38 seats, still no bar program, still packed on Friday and Saturday nights, and the name above the door still reads exactly what it has always read, earned and held and defended by exactly one person, Holt and Company. And if this story moved you, if you've ever had to defend something you built from people who felt entitled to a share of your work, drop a comment below. Tell me your story. Tell me where you're watching from. Because the community in this comments section understands something that Marcus Holt would recognize. Real things take real time, and the people who try to shortcut that process tell you everything you need to know about them the moment they try. Like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, and remember, patience is not weakness, it is the longest game and the one most worth playing.